Hello, and welcome back to Educational Warfare. I'm Dr. Jordan Lauer. Today we're talking about the backpacks teens wear. Don't worry though, this is not an episode to sell actual backpacks. Today we're talking about the invisible burden that every teen carries. But first, some program reminders. I want to give a special thanks to Tommy Ruth and the amazing location here at Cadet Toys and Comics. So where can you find our show and any content? Well, you can first follow us on Blue Sky at Dr. Jordan Lauer at bsky.social, on X at EDU Warfare. You can watch full episodes, video episodes of our show on Spotify and our YouTube channel, Educational Warfare. And you can now find episodes, shorts, my blog, and a link to my new book on my website, jordanlauer.com. And if you like what you see and hear and want even more, please remember to hit that like and subscribe button. You can also email the show and connect with us at our email at educationalwarfare.pod@gmail.com. I think we covered everything, so let's get to the main event here today. So when a teen walks into our school or into your living room or home, they're not just carrying their Chromebook or their AirPods in their backpack. They're carrying trauma, identity crisis, romantic hopes, the argument that they had with their best friend, and anxiety. And often, no one sees that. So today, I'm unpacking The Two Backpacks, my new book, and why it matters more than ever. You can find this on jordanlauer.com or Amazon. We can check it out. I think it looks beautiful. I'm super excited about it. So that's what we're talking about today, breaking down some parts of the two backpacks and what that means, why I wrote the book, little preview of what's in it, kind of going through the first few chapters just to kind of explain exactly what is the two backpacks, what does that mean, how can that affect teachers, parents, family members, and even teens themselves. When I wrote it, I had all those people in mind. I wanted teens to be able to read it so they could better understand themselves and their stuff. I wanted teachers to read it so they could understand their students in their classroom. I wanted parents to read it so they could better connect with their teens. So why did I write this book? So there's a few moments, right, where you really start to get this idea for why these things matter, and it starts forming in your head. It first started for years, having 16 plus years in the classroom. Over those years, I'd been in teachers' lounges. And, when you're in a teacher's lounge, teachers obviously talk about school, they talk about their students, they talk about pretty much everything, but it always kind of generates back to students and what's going on. And over the years, you start to hear the same refrain. These kids don't care. These kids only think about X. And I started realizing that this was probably the same thing that was said about me as a student by my teachers, except instead of replace the phone or replace social media with video games, it was TV in the 80s, comics in the 70s, rock and roll in the 60s, cars in the 50s, and of course, for every generation for males, girls. Every single one, there's always all they care about is girls. It was just always something. And this is not the teacher's fault. I'm not blaming teachers and saying that they didn't understand. It was just a lack of understanding about why teens have these consistent behaviors over generations. Emotional outburst, defiance, what seems as lack of care for work, what seems as laziness. It was always those same things, just kind of pushed off under a different scapegoat. Right now, what do we say? It's social media and phones. All they care about is their phone. They just want their phone out there all the time. Okay, could be the same thing. Again, talking about me. You better believe that I was really excited to get home and play Twisted Metal 2 on PlayStation 1, right? So my teachers are probably thinking that, like, oh, he's just drawing all these cars and stuff. He doesn't care about his work. It was always something. So I realized we needed to understand. But there's one moment that really put into focus. It was shortly after COVID that we had just started to kind of be allowed back out to different places. My wife and I went to a restaurant, a little local place that we really enjoy, and it was really cool being back out in it. Actually, like after a couple months of being just with our family, just with each other, being in an area with different people was, almost not a bad way, but an assault on the senses. Being close, you had to relearn how to do that. And as we sat at our table, there was a table behind us of a couple, 5 moms, probably in their 40s, and they were just sitting there chatting. So I'm sitting there with my wife, we're talking, and I do start to eavesdrop because I hear some interesting talk. These moms started talking about their kids, after being pretty much locked in the house with them for the last several months. That came up. And some of the things they were saying, I understood when teachers didn't get why teens were doing this, because a lot of times as teachers, any teachers out there, this, we really don't know many of the things going on with our students' lives until either there's an event that we have to be told, or they tell us, or parent emails. Other than that, we're just kind of assuming every kid is, getting up, going to school, going home, doing homework. And hearing these moms who are with their kids all the time not understand, and again, no fault of their own, but not understand some of the things that were happening in their household, and then it sounded exactly the same as some of the things I heard in the teacher's lounge, I realized we need to find a way to better understand teenagers. So with that came the idea, what do I mean by the two backpacks, right? So what is the second backpack? Well, the first backpack, of course, is their backpack that every kid has in it, their Chromebook, the AirPods, crumpled up homework assignments, granola bar or protein bar, maybe somewhere in there. But the second backpack is invisible, right? It is heavy. It carries everything we can't see. Again, the things we talked about: trauma, anxiety, popularity. Does that girl I have a crush on like me back? And there can be trauma in there too. Are there issues at home? Is my mom, who works 3 jobs, going to be back before I have to go to school? Do I have to wake my siblings up? These are often real realities, and they put them in this second backpack, and they carry that everywhere. It slumps their shoulders. It is heavy. And I wrote the 2 backpacks we can find on Amazon.com, and you can find a link on JordanLauer.com. I wanted to kind of open up this backpack and peer into it and start to at least identify the things that are in there so we could better understand where our students are coming from. Because if we could get these things in the second backpack, if we identify them and work out what they mean, how they affect development, how they affect behavior, we could then start to have more fulfilling relationships. We could then start to build trust, and we could start to really place some of these behaviors that drive us crazy, frankly, just like the moms at that table. One mom literally said to her friends, I ask her to do a simple thing, and she acts like I just asked her to do the craziest, most insane thing you think of, and I'm the parent. I'm the one who should be, getting the respect, and she just acts like I'm just a burden on her. If we could understand why that's happening, if we could understand the reason that teens push that way or act that way, then instead of being, talking to your friends at a restaurant and being exasperated, then you can go, okay, this is this, and I can do this to mitigate that, or I can do this to guide them through that. And it'll cause so much less strife in our homes, in our classrooms, everywhere. So that's the point. That's what the second backpack is. It's carrying all these invisible burdens, these things that weigh down teens. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to write this, is kind of the mix of the teacher's lounge and everything after that. And on top of these parents, I really wanted to dive into that and explore it. So that's what we're going to do. So we're look into the first content in chapter 2. I really wanted to break down, I think, to understand the second backpack, you first have to understand how the brain is developing, how the teenage brain develops. How are they thinking? We often think of them as just, especially when they start to develop physically and start to look like adults, we instantly go, oh, they're an adult. They're mini adults. They just need guidance, but they're just like me. They just have less experience. And frankly, that is not true. So let's dive into that brain development that we talk about in the second chapter in the book. So first of all, teenage brains aren't defective. There's nothing wrong with your kid if he or she is forgetful. There's nothing wrong if they are scatterbrained, if they're moody. This is all part of our developmental journey. Okay, so right there, if you're worried that your kid, like you tell them to take out the trash, and you see him take out the trash bag, and then instead of hearing your gate to go out to where your trash cans are, you don't hear it, so you peek outside and you see your kid like running around the yard with the dog, and the trash bag's just sitting there like half falling over, almost spilling, and you're like, I asked you to do one thing. If they're distracted, boom, that's part of development. That is completely normal. So your kid doesn't have anything wrong, isn't anything extraordinarily different. It's just the pathway. So if we expect teens to act like mini adults, you're going to be constantly disappointed because of this development. Frankly, their brains aren't finished yet. And that's not a flaw. That's just a feature of humanity. The prefrontal cortex, or the PFC as I call it, the frontal lobe, it's responsible for decision making, risk assessment, and impulse control. It is still developing. And when's it developing until? If you're sitting there going, all right, well, my kid's 16, so is it going to be developed here soon? I'm sorry to disappoint, but especially for males, but for most human beings, the prefrontal cortex does not finish developing until their mid-20s. Usually for males, it's around 24. So I hate to tell you, but that's not going to be developed until your kid is probably out of the house or your student is well gone into college. Okay, so it's undercooked. The frontal lobe is undercooked. It is developing. It is actually really thick, which is kind of an interesting thing with brain development. We often think of like, if something's building up, you almost want it to be denser. The brain is actually the opposite. We want it to, when it's dense, it means it's still pruning, is a term, out the pathways to it. So it's figuring out what works, what doesn't, and it has to develop and do that. So since it's thick and underdeveloped, still cooking, right? It is basically means that our teens live in the emotional center of their brain, their amygdala, which is like, the deep middle of your brain. So your frontal, your PFC, your prefrontal cortex is right here in the front, right? Your amygdala is kind of like if you went straight through your ear in the center of your brain, that's your amygdala. That's where our fight or flight is controlled. And that is where many of our teenagers live. So let's put this through the perspective of an adult. When an adult comes into a stressful situation, right, or a situation with emotion, what we do is, if it's an emotional situation, let's say somebody comes at me and critiques me, says, hey, why'd you do this? It starts in our emotional center, our thoughts. That's our fight or flight. Our brain first says, is this a threat? Do I have to run? Do I have to fight? Do I got to flop, which is one of it, where you just kind of go numb, right? What is happening? Now, then it bounces it to our PFC. So it bounces it straight up to our frontal cortex, and that is where our logic takes over. So if you came up to me and said, why are you doing this? I'd start there. That's why we kind of get a little tense when somebody challenges us first. But then I evaluate it through all the lenses that we've developed. Like, do I know you? How well do I know you? What do we do? Are you my spouse? Are you my friend? Are you a coworker? And then I filter it through that, and then I come up with a logical response. And usually, and most people, the emotion is abated. Right? Like an answer. Now, obviously, again, you might say, well, I've been in a lot of arguments, Dr. Lauer. Yes. If it continues at that level, it is then taken as a threat, and then our amygdala goes, our blood in our brain goes to our amygdala. And if you get really mad, the phrase seeing red, where you just kind of lose control, that's because you literally see red because all your blood goes out of your frontal lobe and goes into that amygdala to prepare your brain and body for fight or flight. So that's why you can just literally kind of, when people say he lost it, that's what happens. You're actually not thinking, okay? And that part of the brain where an adult may lose it, may have some emotional outburst or start yelling, that's where our teenagers live, because they don't have enough of the frontal lobe to really logic it all out. Hence why you see emotional outbursts so often in teens, okay? So a couple things, we talked about this before, a couple things you can do to help. If for teenagers, especially teachers are in classroom, sounds cliche, but counting to 10. Why count to 10? Have your student count to 10. Why count to 10? Because that time period allows that blood to get back to their frontal lobe, and then they can actually think as much as they can. Again, it's less than adults, so don't expect to count to 10. All of a sudden, you'll be talking to Mr. Spock, where it'll be all logic and no emotion. That's not going to happen. But at least gives them the ability to do that. Also, you can have them drink a bottle of water. Just literally take a bottle of water, chug it. What does that do? Water helps to break down cortisol. And cortisol is one of those emotional chemicals. So if you drink that, it breaks it down. Also, again, if you're chugging a bottle of water, what aren't you doing? You're not yelling. You're not getting more emotional. So it's giving that blood time. And also you're breaking down the chemical. So giving them time, setting them outside, letting them have that minute. Time is the issue here. So that's why teens seem that they're all gas and no brakes. Okay. Their brain literally lives, like I said, in this emotional center. And then the other part of that is the reward center. Okay. That is why they often are so impulsive. Their brain, because they, again, have trouble using logic, have trouble breaking that down. Their brain is either driven on emotion or rewards. This lovely chemical we hear a lot about, dopamine. Okay. Dopamine is huge to teens because they want those rewards. That's why they constantly push to get those exciting moments, that adrenaline pump, because their brain is literally feeding off that due to lack of logic or knowledge in the prefrontal cortex. So right there, we already, just by understanding the basic development of one part of the brain, the PFC, we can really understand impulsivity. We can understand emotional outbursts. We can understand the need to do risky behaviors, because when they do that and then they get that, when you're, just a little personal story, because I want this to make sure that it's real here. When I was a teenager, I had my friends over. Back then we had old handheld, handy cams with you could hold it. My friends recorded it. I rode my bike off my roof onto my trampoline. Once the bike hit the trampoline, I bounced over the fence and into my pool, right? So when I did this successfully, which every single step of what I just said is dangerous and awful, and that's being a teenager. If you told right now at my age to do that, it'd be like, no, thank you. I'm good, right? Even if you were like, well, the super famous person's watching, like, nah, not worth a broken leg. As a teen, when I emerged from that water, my bike was sinking to the bottom of the pool, but as I came up that water and all my friends were like arms in the air cheering, that was one of the most amazing feelings ever to my brain at that time, because I wanted that dopamine dump of that reward of doing it, that peer praise. All of this goes into it. So we have these things, and this is why you see teens do these things. If you're like, why would he do that? This is why. The brain's searching for those things. So understanding that, and the common behavior that makes sense in this context we talked about, emotional outbursts, risk-taking, inconsistency, and judgment. Again, you might say, I've talked to them 100 times. Why did they do this? They know not to do that. The logic center's not there. Those 100 times you've told them, we're not sure how many sank in. And then if it did sink in, at that moment, they may not have had enough clarity due to that to really put those things together. So that's why you're constantly reminding your teen. So these are just some of the things that we can see and that we understand just by going into a little bit of brain development. That's what chapter 2, the 2 backpacks, goes into there. And also, so now you're dealing with it. If they're living in this emotional center, what are some of the things that we can do to help them through it? Well, one, it's a lot how you respond. And I know this all seems like, hey, parent, teacher, here's a little more on your plate. Here's more that you can do. And I'm sorry for that, but this is once we realize this, if we're able to have these thoughts ahead of time, it's not really adding to your plate. It's making your plate a little easier, because you're going to have less of these conflicts with your teen or with your student. So when you're kind of working through these things, the worst thing that can happen, right, because the teens live in that emotional center, is providing them or coming at them where you either give them fear, embarrassment, sadness, or anger towards a situation. If you do that, because they live in that emotional center, they become reactive. And then basically, because they're reactive, because that logic center is, 1, undercooked, and 2, not active because they're feeling these emotions, they will fail to internalize almost anything that you're trying to tell them that you at that moment find important. So when you find out that Billy was driving his truck down the road and his friends were hanging out the window and he was swerving, and you come at him and a neighbor texts you and said they saw it, so you kind of burst in their room and kind of go into them on that, because 1, you're scared, because this is a scary situation. You don't want anything to happen to your kid or his friends, and you go into them. If they immediately feel like embarrassment that you caught them, or anger because you're even, teens, again, think they're invincible. We talk about that in the book as well, why they feel they're invincible. Some really interesting stories in here about that. If they feel anger, fear, they won't hear actually what you're telling them because their logic shut off. So that whole little diatribe you go on, that whole little lecture you go on, will go right over the head. They're just waiting for how they can react. For, do I need to push back emotionally with anger? Do I need to run? Right? Am I scared? That's all their brain's concerned about. So we can't really come into them like that. We almost have to come from a place of, hey, listen, I know it happened. I'm not a fan of it, but this is why you shouldn't do it. And if you come from that logic point, keep their emotions regulated, they will internalize that. Okay? So that's just one of the things there. So what we should say is, instead of asking, think about brain development of our teens. Instead of asking what's wrong with them, we should be asking what's still developing in them, and how can we guide them instead of react to them. And that's probably, a lot of times we react because we have our set way of doing stuff. And I don't want you to think that I'm sitting here and never doing any of this. Of course, as an adult, I do this too. We react. We kind of put our emotions to it because adults, we have pretty rigid schedules. So we're thinking like, all right, I can do this and this and this, and that'll get me to here. And you ask your teen to do one of these things, and then they do it wrong or screw up, and it blows everything up, and we're emotional about that. But if we can just kind of hold off and realize they're not doing it to be disruptive, they're not doing it to be disrespectful, they're doing it because they literally can't help it, that starts to change those conversations and actually creates more and more healing, more and more trust. And then before you know it, with your student or with your teen in your home, you're having a better relationship. And I think that's what we all want with the teenagers in our lives. So understanding that their brain's underdeveloped, right? We need to take the wheel. And by we, I mean parents, teachers, adults in their lives. We need to help them guide this, right? Like letting kids figure out on their own might sound empowering to them, but it's often just a kind of a form of abandonment in disguise. Not like an awful abandonment like the authorities are come get you, but an abandonment to where, hey, they'll figure it out. They may, but what's going to happen along the way? And I'm not saying they have to be helicopter parents. That's also damaging because then your teens don't get this. But what I'm talking about here is guiding, right? If you ever ridden with somebody, a teen driver, how many times you kind of reached over when they're veering a little bit and just gently push the steering wheel, gently nudge the steering wheel to straighten up to show them this is where you need to be. That's what I'm talking about with the things in their life. We kind of have to just gently grab the wheel, make sure they're staying in between the lines. We're not scooting them out of the driver's seat. We're just being there for them. The brain's a car with a powerful engine and a learner's permit in a teen. And we need to be in the passenger seat, basically. So there's a common myth here. Teens push back, right? They don't want you involved. Every time you try to help them out and do what's good for them, they don't like it. Okay? They're like, stay out of my life. They roll your eyes. They say, I hate you. Okay? That's the myth. Okay? And you might say, it's not a myth. That happens to me all the time. That's not exactly what they're doing, though. The reality is pushback is they're testing their safety and consistency. We all know this. Child research has shown that kids, as much as they push for it, they love structure. When I say they love, it's not like they're secretly sitting there like, I do hope I have a good bedtime tonight. It's their brain loves it. Even though their personality, their emotional side right now, we've all had a kid who's just, it's like, all right, well, got to get them ready for bed. It's 7:00. I expect them to be laying down by 8:15, so I should start now. We've all been there. But all the research shows when a kid has a consistent bedtime when they're younger, when they have that structure, they do better in almost every measurable metric. Okay? Teenagers no different. So what they're doing is they're pushing that. Like, okay, they said I can't do this, but if I push, will it really be that or will I get more? Okay, they're trying to figure out their identity, trying to figure out their limits, right? And we have to understand that and not be so rigid if they do push a little bit and just say, no, this is what it is. We talked about this. We agreed upon it, okay? Start giving them those little bits of logic of why this is the way it is. Hey, man, you agreed on this. And we're going to do it because we talked about it, we set this, and you agreed on it. That logic kind of goes in their brain. It's like, well, yeah. They still may push, again, impulsivity, right? But that at least is there. And then there's that consistency where they're going to eventually go, okay, I can't keep pushing this. Like, it's always been this. That is just a waste of time. And their safety. They want to know that you mean what you say. Okay, their brain is developing, and part of that brain development is get me to an older age, which means they have to constantly ask, who can I trust? Where am I safe? And that even goes with parents. And that seems unfair, right? We wiped their butt, we changed them, bathed them, fed them, taught them how to tie their shoes. Like, really, you're still not trusting me? It's nothing against you. It's just the brain making sure, doing those very basic evolutionary things. So there's two main parenting roles that we can take when we're grabbing this wheel, right? When we're kind of gently guiding them. Okay. The first one is the guardian role. Okay. The guardian protects and prevents. All right. Just like it sounds. Now, I don't want to get that confused. We're not talking about helicopter parents. We're not talking about just this, you lock them in there. You're not talking about Harry Potter being under the, stairwell and just being let out at certain times. What we're saying in the guardian role is that you literally set boundaries, set rules, and then this role anticipates the things that teens are do and make sure that they're not going into those things just kind of free reign. So for example, your teen is like, obviously parties are number one fear, what could happen at parties, the bad things. So the guardian role is you're really setting up like, okay, you're going over to your friend's house. I want to, what's the parent's phone number? I'm going to text them. This is when you're kind of making sure there's not those little like, oh, I'm staying at Becky's house tonight. And Becky tells her mom that she's staying at your house and really you all go to a party. Okay. This is preventing that. All right. So that is, but it's still kind of letting them have those things. Again, it's not super rigid, but you're there and it's super consistent, and there's no real discuss. You set the rules, and then that's kind of the way it is. So the other role is the coaching role. Okay. This allows some behaviors and it guides the teen through how they should approach the situation. There's still rules. When you read about this in chapter 3 of the book, the two backpacks, when you read about this, as you're reading, as I describe it, you're probably going to start saying, oh my gosh, that is way too lenient, right? That is way too, like, all these things you're letting them do. But the important thing with the coaching role is it's just exactly what it sounds. It's a coach, okay? And you need to think of it kind of more like a football coach, right? A baseball coach, not like a life coach where they're just kind of, you come in and they help you through the issue you're dealing with. What does a football coach do? They establish what you're going to do. Okay. And then they expect it to be done that way, but they do allow, they allow you to play within those rules. Okay. Now, if you totally screw up, right? Talking about football, if an offensive lineman, you tell him to go block this guy and he just runs the opposite way and gets the other guy, what do? As a coach, you correct him. Okay. You say, hey, you were supposed to get this guy. We ran through that. Why didn't you? You're asking them and you're telling them what they should have done. You're coaching and guiding it through it. Where comparatively, if you look at the guardian role, one almost doesn't allow him to go over there. Make sure, like right before you snap the ball, hey, remember you're getting this guy. It's constant reminders. It's really guiding them. In the coaching role, you allow them to experience that. Okay, so they may screw up. Okay, you make sure you know where they're going to be, but if they sneak away to a party, okay, you let them know. You have a conversation with them. Hey, you said you were doing this. This is why it's hurtful. You're guiding them through that thing. So there's two examples here, and there's some other ones. Like for example, in the guardian role, you may say, I think my 13-year-old is not ready for scary movies yet. So what are you doing? You're guarding them from that kind of emotional trauma could come from being scared. And you make sure you're like, hey, you're not going to watch that. Not yet. You got to wait till you're 14, okay, 15. Where in the coaching role, it's like, you know what? Scary movies exist. My kid's going to be scared sometimes. So we need to do that. You let them watch it, but you explain to them, hey, this isn't real. This is not going to happen to you. If you're too afraid, turn it off. If you're having feelings of being scared after, don't just like run from your bedroom to the bathroom full speed in the dark hallway. Come talk to me. I'll help you through it. So there's a little difference there. So those are two roles. So what do kids need as we're doing this? So those are two things. And remember, one thing I mentioned in the book in chapter 3 as well is that with everything in life, this is fluid. So if you're reading this, if you're diving deeper into this with a very full explanation here, that'll probably I even give 2 examples in chapter 3 of the same scenarios, putting cell phones up at bed. I give 2 examples. I give a dialogue between a parent and a teenager of the guardian example of like what it's like if you have bedtime cell phone rules, and then the coaching sample of the same situation, bed at phone, and what you do in that. So there's a good deep dive in here about if you want to see some real examples of that. But as we're doing that, what do kids need? Okay, they need structure without suffocation, right? They are trying to become individuals. They are trying to figure out who they are other than you. Okay, it's a hurtful time because this is the time period when your child goes from, you always hear like, he's a mom, he's a mama's boy is always with his mom, or the daughter's a daddy's girl. And this is where they really push away those things that you used to do. Your daughter gets in the car with you and normally you listen to the same music, like you're rolling down the road, listening to country music and songs come on, you're turning up, singing along. And all of a sudden she's like, can we listen to something different? You're like, oh yeah. And she's like, can we turn on Ice Spice? And you're like, trying to be that, like, keep that connection. Like, yeah, sure. And you hear the lyrics, you're like, what is happening? That's these moments. And they're hard because it's like, who are you all of a sudden? So they're trying to figure that out and trying to find that. But, they need to be able to do that without being suffocated. You can't just be like, no, we don't listen to that. Because now they're going to start feel ashamed. Like, hey, why is this stuff that my friends listen to and that I kind of like, why am I being shamed for it? So that's what I mean by structure. Boundaries that show love, not control, right? Building that trust. Conversations that invite trust, not fear. One of the biggest things with teens that I've found, especially teaching students, working with my children and researching in here, is that number one, teens want to feel that they're a part of it. If they're just like laid out instructions, that's when they really start to rebel, because they're like, I can't, especially if you have, if they're doing everything right, every other part of life, doing well in school, doing well in sports, doing well in social stuff, and then you're still just kind of on them. I mean, with anybody, think about your job. If you're doing great at work and all of a sudden your boss is just still harping on you, you don't feel very appreciated, do you? Like, what else do I have to do? Our teens feel the same way, especially with parents and teachers. You're the ones who are supposed to love them, care for them, and you might say good job or I'm proud of you, but then it's you're still so rigid. They really start to push against that. So, you want to have these conversations, like talk to them like, hey, what are you experiencing? What are you feeling? What do you think about this? And it's as simple as, again, the coaching role. I've had coaches sit me down and be like, hey, what do you think about this? We're still going to do this. I'm asking you about these plays. I'm not changing my offense if you say, oh, let's throw the ball 100 times a game. I'm not doing that. So the buck still stops with you, but you can get their input, and that really goes a long way. So what are some, you can, call it the cultural narrative that teens need space without recognition that they crave connection, right? They need space. In the book, I talk about how teens disappear into their lair. Right. I'm fully in that mode with my kids right now. It used to be when, if you have I have 3 children, it used to be in our living room, all 3 children were there all the time. Right. They would maybe go in their room for a few minutes to play or go get a toy, but guess what? It's in the living room. Now, we eat dinner and we're all at the table. That's still something, if you have the ability to do that, eat at the table, have those conversations. Don't allow phones at the table either. Talk to each other. But as soon as literally the dinner's over and we kind of clean up, it's like somebody said, meeting adjourned, and all the kids back to their room. I often call it their lair. What they're doing in there is figuring out who they are. Right? They're watching their shows. They're figuring out their music. They're writing in the journal. They're texting a friend and working those relationships. So it's fine that they do that, but they still crave connection. Just because they're in the room doesn't mean that they want you to completely ignore them. When you're like going to Kroger, don't just like disappear and they come out like, why is my parent not here? You can still say, hey, I'm going to Kroger, you need anything, you want to come? They can say no, but that's that connection they need. You're kind of allowing it on their terms. So that's some of the things and that we're talking about. And the most important thing is model that behavior. Show those conversations. Show how if you're upset. One of the biggest things I tell people, and I definitely mentioned here, and that I've really tried to practice, I have to credit my parents for doing this, especially kind of being an older generation. I really always give my parents credit that they did this, is if you do have a blow up, right, it's going to happen. Like, we give strategies in the book and hopefully it helps that, but nothing is perfect. You're dealing with emotions and people. There's still going to be these little blow ups here and there. Apologize. Go into the room if you got angry and say, hey, I'm sorry for yelling. I'm sorry for getting upset, but here's why. Here's why it happened. And what you're doing is there. One, you're modeling that adults can say sorry. And that's super important because a lot of times adults often feel, teachers feel too, that if we say I'm sorry, that we automatically give up some power. You don't. You're still the adult. You still set the rules. That's why you need those clear expectations and rules. But what you're doing is you're modeling that an adult can say sorry. An adult can be wrong and can come and have a conversation about being wrong. But then you also say, here's why. So now you're giving them those tools, right? Like you're providing that logic you're not yelling. You're not yelling your point at them where they're fully in that fight or flight and they're not hearing anything. They're just reacting. If you're sitting on their bed and you're just talking to them, you say, hey, this is why I got upset. And you explain the situation. Now their logic part's activated because they're calm. They've heard you say I'm sorry, so they know they're not in trouble. And you've modeled it, and now that you're giving them that logic of why you got mad, they can go, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, I would be mad too if that happened to me. And they've just grown. They've put that in their brain, so now it's something as their frontal lobe's developing that they can tap into. So you already have that. So that's just some from us taking the wheel, right? And so that's doing that. So if you like any of these things, if you want some more of this, again, don't forget to like and subscribe on our YouTube channel. You can go to Amazon, check this out again, or to jordanlauer.com and look into it. Like I said, hit that like and subscribe button to get more content like this. We'll dive deeper into different chapters later in later episodes and kind of really go into them. Just kind of doing an overview of the first couple. So talking about the development, talking about things we can do. Chapter 4 of the book really looks into emotions. Okay, it's battening down the hatches for the emotional hurricane, and that's probably, as I say that, many of you are nodding your head like, "Yep, that is what my teen is. They are an emotional hurricane, and I never know what I'm gonna get. I don't know if it's just gonna be a breezy day or if I'm gonna have to board up my windows and doors to expect a car flying through it from the force of the winds." So the important thing here is that it isn't a problem to fix these emotions. It's information to understand. All right, and I call it a storm. And from chapter 4, a little quote in the book here is, "All humans fear a storm. It is a deep and hidden part of our ancient psyche. Born from a time when a storm ushered in a myriad of ways to fall ill or die. Yet when it comes to our teenagers, we know the storm is inside, but we do not fear it. In fact, we often coax it out because how dare a child take out their emotions on us, their reason for life, shelter, safety, and care. Understanding what our teenagers are carrying emotionally, the things slumping their shoulders with a weight they don't fully comprehend, will help weaken this storm." And that's kind of what we're doing here in the two backpacks is looking at these things. We're trying to understand what they're carrying so we can take some of that weight, so we can understand it, take it out of there, or at least work with it so it's one less thing that they're carrying. So when a teen, we talked about this with their brain, when a teen's angry or shut down or overwhelmed, they're not being dramatic. They're being human with a developing brain. Again, that's where they live in that emotional thing. So they're not, when you see one of your teen just kind of fly off the handle for something relatively easy, when you see a teenage girl freak out because a acquaintance wore the same shoes, right? What she's doing is, one, she's automatically in the amygdala. She's in that fight or flight, and she is so afraid she thought those shoes would really help her with her crush, would really help people compliment her, and now there's somebody else with them. So how do I get that? How do I get that acceptance? How do I get that reward, that dopamine we talked about? And so because there's not a logic sense, that frontal lobe not fully developed, the emotion's all it is, and you have this emotional outburst, okay? And so it's just part of it, right? Emotional regulation, being able to understand that, takes time, it takes practice, and more critically, again, adult modeling. There is a strong correlation between how parents act and then how kids will act. If you're a dad and you're out there building something and your teenage sons are helping you, and every time something little goes wrong, a screw doesn't, we've all built stuff from either IKEA or ordered on the internet, and you're like, oh, this would be great. And like 5 hours later, and, a lot of adult words possibly, it doesn't fit, right? But every time something goes wrong and you just start cursing or throwing things, that's probably how your teens, that's what they see. So that's probably how they react. Okay. I'm not saying don't be a robot. I'm not saying don't have emotions, but just be aware of that, because a lot of adults know how hard emotionally regulating yourself is, and our frontal lobes are fully developed. Imagine for a teen who doesn't have that. So modeling is really important. So for teachers, if a student is dysregulated, they literally can't access higher thinking. So if a teen's upset or having issues, they can't do the thing in the classroom you're asking them. The basic thing is apply. Okay, so that's why we have to be aware of that. So if we have a kid, if you take a kid who's, in the hallway, you see kind of these two kids talking kind of heatedly, and then you kind of say, hey, go to class, and they kind of look at you and like, yeah, okay. And then that kid's in class, and then you notice them not doing the thing they're supposed to be doing or not doing it well. That's why. Okay, don't get on to them for not doing it. Don't say, hey, I just broke an argument up in the hallway. You better do your work. That's a kid who might need those few seconds outside. You may need to talk to them. Say, hey, what's that about? Let them calm down. Okay, that's that little personal touch. You should ask yourself, what's the feeling behind the behavior? We shouldn't punish emotion, right? That's what parents And teachers and stuff, sometimes you do that. We see it and then we punish the reaction instead of what's the guiding purpose. How can we guide them through that? And we definitely cannot. One of the things that when I've talked to teenagers and worked with teenagers, one of the things that they get upset the most about is dismissing their feelings because adults say they overreacted. Now, most likely they did, right? And again, that's because the logic's not there. So they probably did. But to them, that's a real feeling. I mean, you just throw it aside. Why would they trust you? Okay. I felt this. You said it was dumb. I'm still feeling it. So am I dumb? What? You just called me dumb. Now I'm feeling that on top of it. And they just shut down towards you. So again, when I talk about this, I don't want to seem like, this is not telling you to just be, Mary Poppins all the time with them, that you just have to be like, let's talk about it. You, again, rules, expectations, boundaries set there, but understanding what they're feeling and talking them through it, being calm can really quickly do that if you get why it's happening. And that's the whole point that I was trying to make in this, the whole point we're trying to work through and walk through in the book. So, classroom and parent tip for the emotional storm is, honestly, you have to name it to tame it, right? Help kids label what they feel. If they don't know what they're feeling, how are they supposed to understand it the next time they feel it? If you get them to, with your kids, if they're just so frustrated, with my children, I've seen times to where they've been so frustrated at something that, my wife and I are trying to figure out where is this coming from? Because often as parents, right, with anything, you see this with spouses, even adults, who often gets the brunt of the emotional storm, the hurricane, right? It's the people you're the closest to. It might have nothing to do with you, but you take it out on your spouse. You take it out on, sometimes you take it out on your kids. You take it out on your parents if you're teens, because you feel safe with them and you just kind of let it go. And you don't mean to, right? So if you get them to name what they're feeling, hey, what is good? Why are you so agitated? Everything. I asked how your day was, told you that there was, lunch meat in there if you want a snack, or that I made Rice Krispie treats and you rolled your eyes at me how your day was and ugged me with Rice Krispie treats. And what's going on? If they can start to say that, hey, I'm frustrated at this, you can talk them through that. Now it's real. Now they feel understood. So that's what I mean. Name it to tame it. Get them to talk about, get them to name that specific thing. Just saying it, you'll start to see them calm down visibly. Or if thinking about it, which some people do, the more they think about something, the more riled up they get. That's when you give them that time. Like, okay, so you're upset. I'm going to go back in, make sure everybody's doing the stuff. I'll come back out in the hall. Just breathe out here. If you have water, hand them a bottle of water, and then come back out. You'll probably see a pretty different person when you step back out. Emotions for this that we talk about in the book is a diagnostic tool, right? Learn them, read them, understand that. And in chapter 4 of the book, we break down exactly what are emotions. We break down the importance of fear. Fear is one of our most powerful emotions. And I'll believe it or not, a lot of the times you have these emotional outbursts from teens. It's not so much anger. It originates in fear of something, right? And so understanding that really helps you kind of guide them through it, as we talked about in chapter 3. So all these areas about the emotional storm, we dig into that, understand how to label it, understand how to see it. There's some modeling examples of things we can do. And in each chapter in the 2 backpacks, one thing you can see is if you can see this little kind of grayed out area that I have here. They're called story times. These are specific examples of things I've experienced in the classroom over the years, or that somebody, a teaching friend, a parent has told me, and I put those in there. And there's a couple each chapter. And what the goal of those is supposed to be, an entertaining story that deals with what we're talking about. So you can actually see it in a real life situation that has happened, and you can kind of see how it's handled, and it connects to what we're talking about in the book. That way you kind of, not only can you understand emotions and some of the research behind it, then you can kind of see a real situation and exactly what was being talked about. So again, you can grab that at Amazon.com or JordanLauer.com, and we can really start to create pathways, understanding, and healing by simply just knowing what's in the backpack. We're unpacking the second backpack today, and that's the work of the book as well. So for teachers, right, a couple things, what's going on in schools with the first couple chapters we talked about with, the brain development with understanding that teachers and adults need to kind of grab that wheel and make sure it stays straight, and then dealing with the emotional hurricane. A lot of schools, too many schools are trying to control what they don't understand, and when you do that, you lose trust, you lose students. Right now, our students, they're the most connected teenagers have ever been, right? Connected to information, connected to each other, okay? And that connection, when I say connected, I mean the ability to talk, the ability to get information. It's not so much actual connection. We actually talk about that in chapter 7 of social media. It's not real connection, but they have the ability. So they can, if they don't feel trust, if they don't feel that they can kind of connect with you, they can disappear into a world instantly. When I was in school, when an older generation in school, if you kind of had that with the teacher, you just kind of had to sit there, right? And you couldn't go anywhere else. Now, teens get their phones out under the desk and just be like, you know what, I'm done. I'm going to start scrolling. We see that a lot. Teens are starting to, a study by Stanford said that they showed that when phones are allowed in the classroom, teens, instead of working through difficult problems, would rather just disappear and scroll. So as soon as that activity you're doing gets hard, instead of where previous generations, because there was no other option, might say, okay, I got to figure this out and actually get into it. Now, because the availability, they just kind of, nope, I'm done, and will risk scrolling on their phone until you say something to them, until you catch them, because they don't want to deal with that problem. And they do that with other things in their life, especially relationships, with trust. So we have to build trust. Ignoring mental health, right? When teens tell you something, make sure you listen. Okay, so we need context. We need relationship. We need a trauma-based lens. One of the things I state in here was a really eye-opening moment for me, and it may sound silly, but I was a younger teacher, and when you're a younger teacher, you're really trying to have control of your classroom. You're really trying to make sure that you look good. You don't ever want anybody walking by your door, looking through the window, and being like, "Oh my goodness, what's happening in there?" You want them to look through the window, and be like, "All right, I see somebody's in charge and kids are doing things. Good deal." So you're really on that. And I had this student who I could tell was kind of, dysregulated, upset. But I just kind of was like, it wasn't being disruptive. So I was kind of like, okay. I didn't take the few seconds to be like, hey, you all right before we get started? You need to talk or anything? Didn't do that. Just kind of went into it. And then I just noticed he was super distracted. And so, kind of as kids are working, they're supposed to be working, he's distracting kind of others. Again, not running around the room, but just talking, not really doing it. So I went over to him, and he basically said, I was like, hey, what are you doing? He got upset that I called him out, and so he was like, he kind of had a little emotional breakdown. He said, my mom didn't come home last night. I don't know where she went, and I had to get my brother and sister up and fed and to school. And I don't know if she'll be home tonight, so do you think I give a bleep about Napoleon? Said it right to my face. I was pretty shocked. Didn't know what to do. Part of me was like, oh, I can't believe they said that. I should punish them. I didn't. Part of me was like, you know what? Let's go outside for a second and talk. And luckily I took that moment, and that was that was kind of where all this thought really started early in my career. It was like, wow. I'm up here thinking like I'm talking about history and it's super important and these kids need to know it and it'll make them more rounded. And this student is like, I don't know where my mom is. I have to make sure my brother and sister get home. It's so many other things in that backpack that of course what I was talking about didn't matter. And we can't be upset when that happens. Life happens all the time. And if it gets in the way of your classroom or something happening, we can't just not deal with that. So that's one of those important things. Oftentimes we see defiance. That outburst could have been easily labeled as defiance. It would have when I was a kid. If I would have said that to a teacher, I would have been in the office, boom, would have told the principal maybe, they would have done like a wellness check or tried to contact, but I still probably would have been punished. Instead of defiance, it may be a kid trying to protect themselves. Again, real defiance, yeah, we should stop. We should have rules, expectations, but we need to be aware that backpack could have something that we never even imagined in it. So, if we treated emotional pain like physical injury, our schools would be very different. I mean, think about that. This kid is going through something emotional, right? He at 14, he had to get brother and sister up and basically be dad. Get him ready, get him to school, make sure they're fed, get him out the door, and also do that to himself. And he's 14, and that's hard to do. Now imagine, so he's emotionally hurt by that. Imagine if we would have treated it like he rolled his ankle and fell down the stairs. 5 teachers would run to him. We'd go to the nurse. We'd be in there. The principal would pop in. We'd do all that. Physical is easy to see because, oh my gosh, it's happening. But when we notice something like that happening emotionally, treating it that way, taking the time to check, hey, you okay? What do you need? Our schools will look a lot different. We have kids feel trust and not be so on edge. So what adults can do, the good news, right? So the good news in here, you don't need a counseling degree to help a teenager feel seen and safe. You really don't. There's some strategies that we can do. There's 3 strategies for parents and 3 strategies for educators. So starting with the educators, right? Greet students by name. All right, this is easy. That's build that trust daily, consistently. Build a routine that creates emotional safety. Sometimes if you have a little circle time where they stand up and you can just have a super benign question that builds trust, like waffles or pancakes. Have them go around the room. What emoji are you right now? Have your students stand up. Just first 5 minutes. What emoji are you right now? Okay, they don't have to go into a deep explanation. It's kind of hilarious, some of the ones you get, but then you right there really understand how your students are feeling in that moment. Oh, I'm the laughy emoji. Cool, you're happy. I'm the kind of grimace emoji, right? Oh, you're kind of feeling weird. I'm the sad emoji, right? You get what they're doing right there. So that's a nice routine that builds safety. To them, it seems silly, but to you, you're learning. You're understanding what they're doing. Respond to behavior with curiosity before consequence. Again, you're still the adult in the room. You're still in charge. So if what's bad enough is going to get them written up, you can still take a few seconds to figure out why it happened, talk to them, and still write them up if they need to. Still take the necessary disciplinary actions if you need to. Or it might be something where you get it and like, whoa, hey, I'm sorry that happened. You need to talk, or hey, let's do this. Just work through this. Focus just on this. We'll talk after class, or you can come by. All these different pathways you can give them. So, that's just. I think that's a good thing for teachers to do. 3 for parents that you can do. Ask questions that go beyond how was your day, right? Same rule for parents. I always tell people, same rule for parents that there are for journalists in an interview. Don't ever ask a yes/no question. Or if you're in an interview, you're like, did you enjoy making this movie? Yes. Where do you go from there, right? What do you say instead? What were the best parts about making this movie? Now you're getting a long, fleshed out answer. Same thing with your teens, right? Don't just say, how's your day? Because what do you get? Good. What'd you do? Nothing. So you can ask questions like, what was something fun that happened today? They might say nothing. All right. You can say, okay, what was something bad that happened today? You might get that thing that's gnawing at them. They might just throw it out there. Okay. So make sure to, ask important questions to really get how they're doing. How are you and your friends doing? Things like that. Regulate your own emotions before correcting theirs. That's a tough part, right? I get it. I'm a parent. When you get especially in the early teen years when this first happens, when you get attitude back for a simple question or request, when you're like, hey, will you, hey, can you put your plate up? And they're like, oh, why do I have to put my plate up? Like something like that. It's very easy to be like, because I said so. Kind of take a moment. This is work on our part, and I'm sorry to put something more on your plate, but these are those little steps because your frontal cortex is developed, theirs isn't. So, we need to continually model that. Like, hey, that was a simple request. I don't know why there's the anger there. You okay? Sometimes when you diffuse it like that, they'll be like, oh gosh, I did overreact, and they'll kind of chill out. We can, also make space for silence. It's okay to just give them some time. And when they do come to, make sure you be ready. Understand those little moments. Your kid's kind of always jumping in their room, going to the lair, and then not really coming out. Then when they do come sit on the couch, when they do say, this happened at school, realize what that is. That is them coming to you and opening up. So put down your phone. Make sure you realize that moment and talk to them. Okay, it's the same as like when a deer, you always see deer, people are standing there and there's a deer and they come out of the woods and everybody's like still because they don't want to scare it because if you spook it, go back to their lair. Same thing for teens, right? If you come out and you're like, if the first thing they hear when they come out of their room, the lair, is a critique, is, getting on to them for not doing something, What do you think they're do? You think they're stay out, or you think they're go back in there and probably have a longer period before they come out again? Right? You're not being afraid of them. You're just understanding when they're coming for you. That silence is okay. For any parents of athletes, especially, don't what if your kids after games. If one of my kids has a bad game or something bad happens, I don't even talk about the game in the car until they're ready. A lot of times we do this with athletes. We just get in the car. It's like, hey, you should have on that 0-2 pitch. What were you looking for? You didn't think you'd throw the curve? Like, now you're just adding to it. Let them. They'll usually, right? You get in the car. You just say, hey, I know that, you can say something. Don't act like you didn't care that the game happened. Like, oh, that was a tough one, bud. Or that was a tough one, sweetie. But it happens. I'm proud of you. Just say that, and then that's it. You'd be surprised about halfway home or a few minutes of like, I don't know why I didn't think curveball on that 0-2 pitch. And you'd be like, yeah, I mean, he's probably throwing it there. What were you thinking? You can really get into it, and boom, now they're like, you're part of it. You're not just what ifing them, hitting them, and making it and even worse. For school leaders, we need emotional development. For teachers, for teens, not just discipline. We're going to reevaluate policies through a developmental lens. That's really why I went to the second chapter here, to really understand that, to understand the emotional side, right? To understand how our brain works, so we can really look through that. And then we can actually have, I think it's super important to have mental health staff where the kids are. It's always fascinating to me in schools that the mental health staff are in this little corner of the main office usually. You have to go find them. Hey, this happened. Have them where they are. Cafeteria. They should be, in there. In case they see something, they can go up and talk to the kid, or they can call the kid in later. They can just observe. And that way we're kind of seeing these things before they get out of hand. They're trained to see the signs. That's their degree, their skill. So they should be in the hallway, in the cafeterias, and not just offices. That way they can be like, you know what? I saw this kid. Normally he's talkative, and today he was just staring down at his tray and even ignoring his friends. I'm going to call him in. And then a quiet moment where you don't embarrass him, you can calm down the office and have a conversation. And they may open up. The interesting thing about teens too, especially, you may be talking to them and they may be not responding at all. Like, hey, you all right? Yeah, I'm okay. Well, I noticed this. Yeah, it's just, they may not be responding. You're like, well, they don't care. But really inside, they're just like, oh my gosh, they noticed. I know somebody noticed me. They may really enjoy that. And it may not work right there in that moment. You may say, okay, well, if you need to talk, I'm right here. Just let me know. And they may leave. But guess what? Next day, they may come in without you calling them and talk. Same thing with teachers. They may come in at the end of the day and say, hey, I'm sorry about earlier, but blah, 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 blah happened. Those are those important moments. Important thing to understand here too as we go into this. And again, we'll dig deeper into it in different specific areas, just kind of looking over the first couple chapters here, 2, 3, and 4. Understand with this, you're not going to fix everything. You may try some of the stuff, and the first time it is awful. It does not go well. But eventually it might. Again, you try these strategies. The teen still blows up on you, but guess what? The next day they come out of their lair and they talk about it. That's a win. So see that moment. You may not fix anything, but you will be part of the load lightening, okay, unpacking that second backpack. So again, if you like some of the stuff we talk about, you want some more, make sure to like and subscribe. And also, any of the stuff on here, if you have any questions, you can email the show at educationalwarfare.pod@gmail.com. And, so that's kind of what we're talking about today, introduction, and, kind of excited that the 2 backpacks is officially out. And it's here. So again, you can find on Amazon. You can find a link to it on jordanlauer.com. And, just again, with the email, educationalwarfare.pod@gmail.com, feel free to write in, ask questions about it. Tell me what you think. If you've gotten a copy, I hope it starts a conversation. I hope it starts some healing. I hope it opens some eyes. I hope you enjoy it. So email the show and let us know. If you do grab a copy as well, please, I'd love it. If you left a review on Amazon, just say what you think, and give it that. That way we kind of know, and that way the world can see it as well, that hopefully it's making a difference. So that's what we're kind of talking about today. So, thank you for being here. And, if you want more content like this, again, the 2 backpacks, like and subscribe. And, don't forget to grab, don't forget to grab your copy. And for, It was awesome talking about it. It's great diving into this. So many stories. I hope to hear some of your stories that you had. Like if you had any of these strategies we briefly talked about, or if you read it, anything that you saw in here that you've done that worked, please email educationalwarfare.pod@gmail.com and let us know, because those are the things that really build those real life stories. I'd love to hear it. So I hope it's helpful. I hope you grab a copy. And it's been a lot of fun talking about it. I hope to dive into it with some guests in the future and really go back and forth on it and talk about different parts. So that'll be coming out in the future. So that's what we have today. For Tommy Ruth and for our team, I'm Dr. Jordan Lauer. Thank you for listening, and thank you for all that you do for our teenagers, and thank you for being a part of the fight.